Thank you, Alex. And I prepared my remarks so I could get through them. And I wanted to say, ironically, it was a federal road that led me to Mary Ann Neeley in 2001 when she put on a one-day show, which, by the way, is what we call symposiums when we're not in public, over at the auditorium at Old Alabama Town. So I knew I had to say something today. So last night I dove around in my email, and I have to say it really needs cleaning out badly, because I found one from her about the first program we did that led to Cultural Crossroads. And I'll tell y'all a secret, we got to the point when we'd email back and forth, we just signed with our initials. So I'm KHB and she's MAN, which spells man. Okay, so I found an email from Man, and she'd sent me the wrong date for the first program she wanted to do on the federal road over at Old Alabama Town. That was not an infrequent event, I want to say. In fact, Mary Ann's computer issues are the stuff of legend. She lost things, the thing crashed, she changed her email address and forgot to tell people, all these kinds of things. But this is what she wrote. This was a day or two before when we'd finally straightened out the date. She said, "The magic moment draws near. I want to thank you for being a part of the fun. As you can see, it's a very full day with a fairly tight schedule, which of course will not be adhered to rigidly." Well, actually, we did a pretty good job with the schedule, unless, of course, we put Man at the platform and she started speaking. And it was fun, and Mark Dauber was there. Is he here? He was on that first thing, and Jeff Benton, you were there, John Hall. We had a high old time. It was SRO. For those of you who aren't in show business, that's standing room only, right? That place was bursting at the seams. And Man was so pleased with the success of that one-day program on the federal road, which she thought was so important to the to Old Alabama Town because of Lucas Tavern and everything. She emailed me and wrote this. I have all these emails. I can't believe it. She said, "I have intended to write you about the ideas for the next extravaganza." Well, it was an inspired idea sparked by something John Hall had brought up. And I'm gonna channel Mary Ann and her accent the best I can. She said, "We have done the federal road. We need to do what came before," which were the Creek Indians. And Man came to that naturally, because she'd done her master's in history at Auburn years ago, writing her thesis on Alexander McGillivray. I don't know if any of you knew that or not. So Man hatched a plan, as she was always doing. Her idea was a series of 5 programs, and we'd explore what was going on in the Creek Nation before and after the federal road. And she said, "Of course, you can figure all that out." And I said, "Okay, I'll do it." And she said, "But what we going to call it?" And I said, "Well, let's think about it." And I came up with Cultural Crossroads, actually. And Mary Ann loved that idea because we wanted to think about Alabama's early history before the war. She didn't want anybody talking about the war. Y'all know what I'm saying, don't you? Yeah. This was real old Alabama. And the idea of a culturally diverse, multi-ethnic, multiracial place in which the Civil War did not dominate everything, and that our history could have gone in different directions. And the crossroads was metaphorical there. And so that's what we did. And I sketched out the 5 programs, and we called people, and we got Creek historians from all over. This was way back in the day, and there weren't that many of us actually. But we had some of the leading archaeologists in the world, Greg Wesselkoff there, Craig Sheldon, a whole host of people came. Mary, I got the speakers and so forth and invited them, but Mary Ann did the work. She wrote the grants for the money to get the people to travel. She found venues, which became a little difficult to do. The most important thing, of course, was organizing the lunches and book sales and handling the publicity, which she was great at, because she would go on the radio, she had news stories, she did all that, and we had a blast. We think the people who came to our programs, the early programs, the CC people is what we call y'all, by the way, liked it. So we got through the first 5. I said, thank you, Jesus. And man said, the people don't want it to end. And I said, OMG, not more of this. And man said, oh yeah, we're going to go on. We're going to go on. We're going to have a retrospective. And I thought, oh yeah, well, anybody can do something for one more year. And that was year 6. And what is this, 18? We did. My Lord, we have looked at God and government, settlement and slavery, the rivers, landscape, cane brakes, meteorites, historians, every weird person who came to Alabama before the war. And we moved around. We did. We have moved from the Capitol Auditorium. We got booted out of there after 9/11. I think they stopped opening on Saturdays or whatever. And we ended up at the Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts because Mary Ann had contacts there. And that was a wonderful place. And we had a really welcoming home there for many years. And we, for a long time, we had an art component with our annual show, as we called it. And finally, we landed here at the Archives, the place that I like to think of as the home of Alabama history. And it really was a perfect match. And we soldiered on for 17 years before Mary Ann left us. And we focused on the history of the real old South, the creeks and travelers and Alabama fever and terrible roads and territorial characters, and taking scholarship to the public, our people, to engage. And I think it not only provided educational opportunities for those who wanted it, but it helped improve our scholarship because the Q&As pushed us to look in new directions for answers. And we have a lot of Alabama people who come here, but a lot of people who come from afar. And all of them always say, you know, what they took away from the audience, a knowledgeable audience asking sharp questions and making you focus and think about things. Well, Man was pretty good with ideas. When she wasn't plotting shows or writing about Montgomery's early history, as you know, she was busy preserving buildings. And as we saw from Collier's fine presentation, the acorns don't fall far from the tree. That was a superb idea. Mary Ann had lots of them. Taking scholarship to the public, preserving buildings. I think historic preservation was really her passion, and one of the jewels in the crown of Alabama's history is Lucas Tavern. And for Mary Ann, that was really a special place, maybe even sacred. It anchors old Alabama town, it educates the young, delights the rest of us. And that's the power of an idea, isn't it? Drag an old worn-out building off the interstate to downtown Montgomery and do something with it. And why stop at one? I mean, there are a lot of you historic preservation nuts in Montgomery, and you've really created something, an educational opportunity, a place where people can come together and learn and preserve the past. And I think you've blessed all our future, and she did certainly, by honoring the past. And I wrote this before I heard Collier's plea, because I think this was her best idea. Her idea was get out there and do something. And so we've done the federal road for number 18. Oh, goody. I know that's what she would say because we had planned this a couple of years ago. So I just want to say God bless you, Mary Ann, wherever you are traveling. You had a lot of powerful ideas. She worked hard. She had a lot of fun. She made the world a better place. She brought people together. And boy, do I wish she could have been here today. And so on behalf of Mary Ann and myself, we worked together all these years to bring speakers and the public together. I want to say thank you especially to our host and to the audience. It has been fun. And as Mary Ann would say, keep learning. And I can't think of a better way to do that than to hear someone from old Alabama town talk about Lucas Tavern.
Thanks, Kathryn. You just used all my buzzwords. This is such an honor to address such a distinguished audience on such a subject. With the passing of Mary Ann, we lost a great historian and an even greater friend. Her influence on documenting the history of Montgomery, of the state, do you love this? It's just beyond measure, really. But in all that, I appreciate this opportunity to tell you what Mary Ann meant to me. Everyone has that one person in their life that just gets us. She listens to you. She shared our interests. She mentored us. She befriended us. She heard it all. I was finishing graduate school and I was doing a local history research project and had a lot of trouble. People had suggested that I go downtown to the landmarks office and maybe somebody down there knew what it was. So kind of early on a frosty fall morning, I was on my way to the archives and I found a plain white building, kind of in a no man's land looking. Said visitor center, some little stick trees, a little bit of grass here and there. So I thought, well, I'll stop in here and see what's going on. And I was greeted by this very vivacious woman who invited me back for coffee. We spent several hours together in the friendly back room of Lucas Tavern, with Mary Ann sharing stacks and stacks of file folders with her research on the Pearly Gerald House, which was the historic structure that I had been looking for information on. So I ended up with all this research and a job. So on January the 5th, 1982, I showed up at Lucas Tavern to begin my journey with Mary Ann. I'm really not, or I don't consider myself a historian. I've been introduced to historic preservation, social history, local history, folklore, material culture, but nothing had really prepared me for the time, several decades, that I would spend with Mary Ann. Mary Ann actually began her career as a teacher and then slowly defected to historian in the late summers of the 1970s by way of historic structure survey around downtown Montgomery, or what she always called street walking. She had been taken under the wings of the dynamic duo here, Milo Howard and Jimmy Loeb, whom she and I both, I think, consider the fathers of historic preservation movement in Montgomery, if not the state. With the passage of the historic federal Historic Preservation Act of 1966, Milo and Jimmy had set out to write ordinances for the city of Montgomery, which we still actually adhere to today. They established the Historic Preservation Commission and the notorious Architectural Review Board here in Montgomery, and the processes that we still use today, 50 years later. The two had actually established the Landmarks Foundation in the late 1960s and persuaded the city of Montgomery to purchase the Ordeman Mitchell Shaw House and began the restoration of the house and the outbuildings itself, which opened in 1971. They were also very instrumental, Milo and Jimmy, in several other large restoration projects around Montgomery in that 10-year time frame as well. Some more expansion down on North Hull Street, Lower Commerce Street Authority, and then this piece of land. In 1971, Mary Ann was offered the directorship of Landmarks Foundation after the current director then, John Vaughn, had left. But by then, the dynamic duo had already brought in, relocated and restored about 11 historic structures at that time into what was then called North Hull Street Historic District, later Old Alabama Town, which is both locally designated historic district as well as a National Register district. Unfortunately, Mr. Howard had passed away in 1981 during the restoration of Lucas Tavern, which was Mary Ann's first hands-on experience with relocation of a historic building, and then that detailed restoration process that went afterwards. She was already pretty familiar, as Kathryn referred to, with the Federal Road and Lucas Tavern through her early research on the road and with her work on the Native Americans, especially her Alexander McGilvery. Lucas Tavern became the visitor center of Old Alabama Town and pretty much the city of Montgomery as well, and the office space for the very small landmark staff. It became the center of all the landmarks activities happening in that block, including the legendary Tuesday morning meetings, which is where the big decisions on any of the current restorations were taking place. as well as any other types of seasonal events and visitors that were dropping by. And for those of you also who were around during that period, there were notorious noontime lunches, canned tuna fish, chopped bell pepper, and handfuls of peanut M&Ms. Late afternoon gatherings at Lucas Tavern always included libations with a few of the local historical preservationists, or hysterical preservationists, as these two are. But as the whole area began to grow, Mary Ann is still continuing her research and expanding her knowledge of everything, but especially the life upon the Federal Road, and she's meeting new folks with that same passion that she had for the road. As the staff expanded, Mary Ann actually relocated her office to the Yancey Dog Trot behind, always still very close to her near and dear Lucas Tavern. Even when Landmarks relocated to its current organizational offices to where you probably know now, down on Columbus Street, she kept a little quiet spot up here in the Yancey Dog Trot where she could write, keep her records, do her research. And some of you who might join us this afternoon will actually see her spot there. But around 2000, 2001, she started putting these ideas together like Kathryn talked about, and she began to work on her vision of this event that was centered entirely around the existing scholarship, and I like the way Kathryn used the word scholarship. That's what's out there, what had already been done and how to collect it. She enlisted the help of those known players, you know who you are, Kathryn, Mark, Gary Burton, and the late John Hall, to create that cultural crossroads. And even 18 years later, she continues that with every existent aspect of the existence that we've talked about today. And it continues with Mark's documenting the physicalness of it. She wanted to encourage the research, publications that were happening, and increase the interest year and year for more scholarship and the scholarship that surfaces about pulling it all together. Since her passing, many folks have shared with us and her family about what Mary Ann actually meant to them and what she taught them about history and just about life. During her years of research, she met so many wonderful, dedicated, committed, and interesting folks like us today, all sitting here, through the many projects that she was involved in. So now as we look at ways to memorialize Mary Ann and her life, I think the best way to remember her is to look at all the things she taught us and to make sure that we continue to pass on her passion and her enthusiasm for the Federal Road, for Alabama and Montgomery's history as well, and all her people. So in closing, I'd really like to invite everybody down to her favorite place, Lucas Tavern, 310 North Hall Street, the corner of North Hall and Jefferson, for some of that libations and a toast to Mary Ann, who led us all down this road. Thank you.